Thank you for joining us today. My name is Marisa Baldine, and I'm the Communications Staffer at the Chesapeake Bay Program. Chesapeake Bay Program is a federal-state partnership working to restore the Chesapeake Bay watershed through science-based restoration. We're very excited to have you all here today for our Magic of Monarch Butterflies and the Race to Protect Them webinar. I know we're all excited for the presentations to get started, but right before we do that, we'd like to cover some quick housekeeping items. All participants are muted, but you do have access to a Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. Please, throughout the presentations, use these Q&A boxes to add questions. And at the end of all of the presentations, we'll have time for each of the presenters to answer questions that were submitted throughout the presentations. The webinar will be recorded and posted to the Chesapeake Bay Program's YouTube page. And after the webinar, we'll send all of the links and resources that were mentioned throughout the webinar to everyone who was registered. Without further ado, we can get started on the webinar. And I'm very excited to introduce our moderator, William Ravina, who is one of my fellow staffers at the Chesapeake Bay Program and works with the Chesapeake Bay Program Stewardship Goal Implementation Team. William, thanks for joining us today.
Yes, hello. Thank you everyone for having me. Like Marissa said, my name is William Ravina, and I will be your moderator for this event. I work with Marissa at the Chesapeake Bay Program as a fellow environmental management staffer with the National Park Service Chesapeake Gateways office. And my work primarily deals with diversity, public access, and protected lands work groups. So I'm very excited to be a part of this webinar and to hear from our wonderful panelists. Our panelists for today are going to be Thompson-Slacum, who is a division chief in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services Chesapeake Bay Field Office, José Luis Alvarez, founder of La Cruz Habitat Protection Project, and Shanna Edberg, who is the Director of Conservation Programs at Hispanic Access Foundation. Our first presenter for today is actually going to be Thompson-Slacum. Julie oversees an endangered species program for Maryland and Delaware and DC. She also oversees the Conservation Planning Assistance Program, which focuses on working with other federal agencies and military to evaluate impacts of their projects on our trust species, but to also work with them in partnership to conserve fish and wildlife. She has worked for the service for 24 years and starting in the coastal program, working on invasive species, and has been in her current position for the last 12 years. She holds a BS in Environmental and Marine Science from Salisbury University and an MS through the University of Maryland Marine and Estuarine Studies program, where she focused on fisheries ecology. And a fun fact about her is that her favorite taxa she has worked on throughout her career is turtles, which I think is a great choice. Without further ado, let's welcome Thompson-Slacum.
Hi, everybody. Let's see if I can share my screen. Let's see. All right, can everyone see that? Okay, thanks for the introduction, William. Like you said, I work for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm in the Chesapeake Bay Field Office, which is in Annapolis. And I am lucky enough to be able to work on federally endangered species. I'll talk about the monarch, which is actually a candidate species right now. So it is warranted for listing. So I'm going to talk about the iconic monarch, the threats the species faces, the status, which I just mentioned, the warranted status, and then just some simple things that individuals can do to help the species. And then I just wanted to mention, so the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, obviously because the species is a candidate and in decline, this is one of our priority species that we're working on, along with other pollinators that are in decline. But essentially all of our programs in the Fish and Wildlife Service, we're trying to incorporate monarch conservation and pollinator conservation into our projects and our partnerships. Okay, this is being a little slow. Let's see. Okay, sorry about that. So just a quick overview of life history and biology of the monarch. Essentially the North American population, we have two subpopulations. We have an Eastern and Western subpopulation. The Eastern subpopulation winters in Mexico, while the Western subpopulation winters in California. And kind of the unique thing about the species is that Eastern population, they migrate up to almost 3,000 miles to get to those wintering grounds in central Mexico. Milkweed is the only plant in which monarchs will lay their eggs, but they're also dependent on nectar producing native flowers for food during breeding and migration. So this is the life cycle of the species. Essentially, the adults essentially leave the wintering grounds, and then we have different generations that lay eggs on the spring and summer breeding grounds. So they move northward, and essentially they lay eggs. Those eggs turn into larvae within 2 to 5 days, and then the larvae essentially develop into 5 different instars over a course of 9 to 18 days. And during that process, the larvae, they're really dependent upon feeding on milkweed. After that, they pupate into chrysalis. And then after 14 days, they become adults. So the generations that are on the summer breeding grounds actually only live for like 2 to 5 weeks, but that last generation that migrates down to the wintering grounds in Mexico, they actually live 6 to 9 months. So the status, so essentially we were petitioned to list this species in 2020, so listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act. We determined that listing is warranted, but precluded by other higher priority listing actions. So this listing's actually being led by our Midwest region, Region 3. But essentially, when a species is a candidate, until we can actually get a proposed and final rule out for listing as threatened or endangered, we have to, if we have it as a candidate, we have to assess the status of the species each year. So essentially, I think that just came out a couple of weeks ago, and the states have seen that. But yeah, we have to assess them annually until they're listed, or we determine that they're not warranted for listing anymore. But essentially, the listing is based on long-term declines in overwintering populations, and this is mainly due to habitat loss and climate change, but also threats that they're facing on the breeding grounds and through migration. And that's habitat and reduction and fragmentation. And that's mainly grasslands being converted to agriculture, but also urban development. But it's also exposure to pesticides and insecticides, which impacts the monarchs themselves, but also their forage resources and milkweed. And then climate change again affecting the wintering grounds, but also can affect their forage resources and the milkweed on their migration and breeding grounds. So what are people doing in the Chesapeake region? People are actually doing a lot. Individuals, groups, agencies are monitoring and tagging butterflies. They're planning habitat, and they're educating the public about the benefits of native plants and pollinators. So for the monarch monitoring, essentially that's coordinated by the Monarch joint venture. And the Monarch joint venture, their purpose is building partnerships to conserve monarchs and other pollinators, but they also lead activities like habitat conservation, education and outreach, and research and monitoring. The research and monitoring, they have two programs. The one is the integrated Monarch monitoring program, but they also have a larval monitoring program. And through those two programs, essentially folks go out and they survey habitat, they survey caterpillars, and they survey adults. Then there's also Monarch Watch. That group's purpose is education, conservation, and research. They provide tags to thousands of volunteers to monitor fall migration. So we get tags from them every year. They also provide resources for education and outreach. They provide free milkweed, and they actually they certify the Monarch Way Station program, which a lot of folks are actually have sites for the way stations in the Chesapeake Bay region. So just an example of, monitoring and tagging. So for our office, for the past several years, we've been tagging monarchs every fall at Poplar Island. I have a team that does the wildlife management, so they're out there every day. But we also have staff that work at Masonville Cove Urban Refuge Partnership, and they've also been doing tagging. And both those sites are certified Monarch Way Stations. And then over the past 2 years, we've really been working hard to work with our DoD installations in Maryland and District of Columbia to actually do tagging too. So now their natural resource managers lead those efforts. So we train them, but now the natural resource managers are actually doing it and bringing folks on the base to do the tagging. And then essentially, I just wanted to say, one of the most important things we can do is to maintain or build habitat. And when we build this habitat, it's not just providing habitat for monarchs and pollinators. It also provides really valuable habitat for bird species, small mammals, and even bats. So one of the issues in areas that are developed is that, we have this transition of natural areas to grass lawns as we convert, to development. And just some, I guess, notes about having these neat manicured lawns compared to native plants. Frequently mowed lawns require more water. They're less heat resistant. They require more management, which includes mowing and fertilizer, and they don't absorb water as well. And then just the usage too, tons of water are used each year to maintain these lawns. Enough drinking water to support billions of people for 1 year, their water use. These lawns use a lot of pesticides, 50 million pounds, and 1.2 billion gallons of gasoline for lawnmowers to keep these manicured. So human benefits of replacing lawns and having meadow habitat and flowers and native plants. We can reduce the impact of climate change. Lawn care equipment, they release greenhouse gas emissions at a rate higher than a truck. So 1 hour of usage is like 500 miles in a truck. Native plants can mitigate heat island effects. We can also reduce pollution. Reduce lawn care equipment use eliminates hazardous fumes and noise pollution. And native plants, meadows, or low mow solutions can reduce and eliminate runoff of both fertilizer and sediment. It can also serve as stormwater management. Plants with deeper roots can better absorb water, requiring less mowing, and changing species will slow water runoff and provide better erosion control. And then bioswales and bioretention ponds can filter contaminants before they enter groundwater. But there's also other benefits to replacing lawns with more native plants. Flowering plants provide routine, pleasant scenery to the natural world for workers and residents. Exposure to green spaces in nature has been shown to reduce stress, anxiety, and depression, increase happiness, social cohesion, and feelings of social support, increases the time people spend being physically active outside, and helps increase our lifespan. And then finally, it provides wildlife watching and educational opportunities. So this is just an example of working with our DoD installations just to kind of alter their mowing practices. But you can see that, you know, just from them reducing their mowing, you see the milkweed on the right side of the slide, you know, is coming up. You do have some non-natives that come up, but you have much more, you know, you have more milkweed and you have more flowering plants that come up that our pollinators can use. And then solar projects. So we're working with some of the solar companies for them to develop meadows. So essentially they're planting meadows around the solar fields, but also in between the panels. And then again, federal agencies like Fish and Wildlife Service, like our refuges, Department of Defense and National Park Service are replacing mowed lawns with pollinator meadows. Just a little bit about some education and outreach. We do try to educate about the importance of meadows and pollinators and monarchs. We recently hosted a 70+ person meadow development workshop for county, state, and federal partners that was held at Patuxent Refuge. And then Friends of Patuxent Refuge has an annual pollinator festival and also offer workshops on container pollinator gardens. And then Masonville Cove Urban Wildlife Refuge Partnership in Baltimore conducts outreach around pollinators and native plants through the programs that they offer to the community pretty much year round. And then within the last couple of years, we've started to have Earth Day outreach events at some of our Department of Defense installations in Maryland and District of Columbia. And then finally, just in closing, again, there's just simple things that you can do to help monarchs and other pollinators. You can get involved with monitoring. I provided some links on the resources page that I provided. You can increase habitat on your property by reducing mowing and planting native species. And then you can educate others on the plight of the monarch and spread the word on planting milkweed and flowering plants. And that's all I have.
All right. Thank you very much for your presentation, Julie. For the viewers, if you have any questions, we will be answering all of the questions at the Q&A at the end. So just keep an eye out for that. Thank you for sharing a lot about the monarch's biology and its life cycle. We will be moving on to our second panelist. Our next panelist that will present is José Luis Alvarez. Mr. Alvarez is a Mexican tree nurseryman in the state of Michoacán, Mexico, and developed the La Cruz Habitat Protection Project from the ground up. He was already growing seedling trees for reforestation projects by the Mexican government and other organizations, and understood the desperate need for reestablishing forest on the mountain slopes around the monarch's overwintering sites. He also understood the financial needs of the subsistence farmers who own these lands. He has spent over 20 years developing efficient methods of growing healthy tree seedlings that utilize readily available organic materials. Throughout this time, he worked with the communities in and around the monarch sanctuaries to demonstrate the environmental and economic value of planting trees on their depleted fields and eroded lands. By providing outstanding quality trees and giving valuable technical support, he has built a relationship of trust and respect among the community leaders and participants in this project. So without further ado, we will see the presentation from José Luis Alvarez. Oh, you're mute.
Am I in?
Yes.
Okay, good enough.
You're mute again.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, well, I'm José Luis Alvarez. I'm the owner of a tree nursery in the state of Michoacán, and I've been producing pine seedlings for the last 30 years. I started producing seedlings exclusively for the overwintering sites of the monarch butterfly in the state of Michoacán in 1997, which is 26 years ago. And we are still planting. This year we planted 1,300,000 trees between the monarchs and the lake areas in Michoacán. Now, I started this program by luck, basically. I met Bob Small and Lincoln Brower. Lincoln Brower is a scientist who spent his whole life studying the monarch butterflies and its habitat. He was there at the same time as Urquhart when, after Urquhart discovered where the overwintering sites were, he published an article in National Geographics. And what happened was that he didn't want anyone to know exactly where this overwintering site was, but he did say that it was in the south of Mexico in the transvolcanic chain of mountains. And so Lincoln, who was a professor in Florida, and Bill Calvert, who was another scientist in Texas, they got together, pulled out some topo maps, and found the place, and immediately went down there. So actually, Lincoln and Urquhart were in the same place, in the same overwintering sites at the same time, although it was Urquhart who found them originally.
Jose, you're mute again.
Gone? Okay, where
There you
did
go.
I leave? I don't know why it does this, but anyway, we started planting trees in the nucleus and then in the buffer. Where it was needed the most was the nucleus and the buffer, okay? But as time went on and the years passed, what I decided to do was to plant trees around the buffer so people could have a place where they could extract trees or take trees and turn them into houses or furniture or whatever they needed, because these people live off the forest. And so I gave them an alternative site to extract wood. And also with a permit, a special permit, so they could extract legally and sell the wood if they needed it. Before this, before I started planting these sites below the buffer, when they needed wood, they would go into the nucleus and they would extract the wood there. So this gave them the option. And one of the reasons I think that this project has been so successful is because of this, because of giving people actually a place where they could extract wood and it wouldn't influence the overwintering sites. Now, with the help of Lincoln and Carol Yoon, in 1997, I went up with the first load of trees to El Rosario. As you can see in the photograph, there I am. There's Ed Ration, Lincoln Brower, and Bob Small. But Lincoln had a friend who is Carol Yoon, who wrote for the science page of the New York Times. And immediately after she made this article about what we were doing, the nonprofit just took off, and it's still going after 26 years. So basically, what you see in this photograph is in the year 2000, I think that was, where because of the cold weather, because of the lack of trees, in other words, a forest has to be tightly knit to protect these monarchs overwintering sites. And what happened here is trees were extracted, and so there were holes in between these trees. And when it started to snow and freeze, it froze most of the butterflies that were at the exterior of these I guess these I don't know what the word is, but anyways. But anyways, so they froze. And as you can see, I'm standing knee deep in monarch butterflies. Now, the good side to this was that they never actually knew how many butterflies were on a tree, how many roosted on a tree. And after this, with Lincoln and some other scientists, we went there and we made a count. And so now we do know approximately how many butterflies roost in one tree. So that's the good side. Now, culturally, as you know, the butterflies are very important to the Purepecha community or the indigenous community. Not only to Purepechas, but also Nahuatl and different natives have always included them in their ceremonies, religious ceremonies. This particular photograph is an altar, and this is the Day of the Dead, which is the 1st of November, and it's when the monarchs actually arrive in Michoacan.
Oh, Jose, you're mute again.
I say ¿por qué se apaga? So anyways, they arrive on the 1st of November and they leave around the 21st of March, which is spring. Okay, they mate. As you know, they don't eat while they're here. These 5 months or 6 months that they're here, they have absolutely nothing to eat. So they're surviving on the fat, on their lipid reserves, which they brought with them from the north, from Canada, from the United States. And in March, they become sexually mature, and that's when they mate. Now they mate, and many of the males die. They're exhausted, but the females are able to go back to the United States, lay their eggs, and then they die. And then the cycle begins again. You know, they're going all the way up to Canada. They live for so many weeks, 2, 3, 4 weeks. They die, they reproduce. And the last generation, as was explained to you, is the one that flies back to Mexico, and it can live, from what I know, between 6 and 7 months. It could be longer, right? Do you have the next slide? Oh, this is the monarch population. Well, you know, I don't know about this. I know one thing. I know that Chip Taylor is tagging. The tagging process was invented by Urquhart, of course. And I don't know if this is actually true, you know. Some years, it seems there's a lot more, some years a lot less. To me, some people say there's not many this year, and I see quite a few. And so it's difficult to judge from this graphic now. Okay, now we're in Hacienda La Cruz, which is where I have the tree nursery. And as you can see, I produce trees by the hundreds of thousands. I have only women working in the nursery. I have 21 women working. We're producing this year close to 2 million trees, and they're being grown in copper block. I make my own compost. I don't buy peat moss. I don't buy all of these things. And I've been producing these trees in this nursery for 30 years, which is quite a long time now. So these trees are grown here. When they're 25 to 30 centimeters tall, they're packed in packages of 10, and they're loaded on my trucks, and they're driven that same day to the Monarch area and distributed to the different communities. Now, I've been working with these communities for 26 years. So I know these people very well, okay? In the beginning, it was difficult because they weren't that interested in planting trees. Once they found out the benefits of the trees, how these slopes that are completely eroded with trees, with pine trees, became once again very fertile and beautiful. As you can see in this, there's areas at the top which I reforested, areas a little below. But normally, all of this land that you see, all of these mountains around the Monarch overwintering sites were stripped clean. And they were used to produce oats and corn. But, you know, year after year, and in these slopes, they became so eroded that the corn just wasn't, you know, bigger than a golf ball, you know, and the oats were about the same condition. So once they decided to reforest these areas, of course, the pine needles covered the soil, so there was very little erosion, first of all, and the humidity would stay on the land. And so they became very fertile. I have plantations that are 15 years old, 20 years old, with huge trees, and it's just very, very beautiful. The climate has changed totally in the area because of these plots. Now, in the beginning, it was just 1 or 2 plots, but the neighbors were very interested in this, and they decided to plant as well. So I started with islands, I suppose you would say it was an island. And then these islands became condensed forests because all the neighbors did the same thing. And I can tell you this, the climate in these forests changed completely. You step out of this forest and it's hot, it's terrible. You step into it and it's like being in an air-conditioned room. You know, it's very, very different. Now, we've been doing this, like I said, for 26 years, and we started in, as you can see in the end there, you can see they're in lines, okay? They're planted in lines. Now, there's some problems now because people are getting more into agriculture or fruit trees, and so there's less space, but there's still quite a bit left for forests. The thing is, people want to have some fruit trees, and I think that's fine. They can mix, you know, fruit trees in a certain area and keep the forest in another. There's no problem. But the whole area, which are many towns, many villages, are all in the same situation. They cut these forests down. They used the land for agriculture, and eventually the land was useless because of the slopes. And so now it's very easy for me to come and see them, and I don't even need to convince them. They convince me to give them the trees to plant, to change from agriculture back into forest. Here you go. Here's a planting site, and as you can see, I have many volunteers. These communities that I plant with, some communities have 300 volunteers, some have 500, some have 200. Now, I involve school children and schools to come and reforest with us. And it's a whole type of education. Everything starts with the young, which is the grade school. And these are basically the children that I take up each year. I work with the school teacher. I've been working with her for over 20 years. And each year we take at least 200 or 300 children up to help us plant trees. And they see the importance of changing these sites that have absolutely nothing but just dust and rocks into forests. They come back the next year and they see how the trees have grown. And this is the most important part, to educate the children. The children will educate the adults.
And thank you, José Luis. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Megan Fulton, the Executive Director of Forests for Monarchs. And José Luis has taken you through a lot of how we got our start and all of the work that he's done. So I just wanted to quickly highlight some of the accomplishments. Since the founding in 1997, we have planted, as of this year, 12.9 million trees. We've had over 20,000 volunteers help. And part of that is as a community forestry model. All of the tree planting, the transportation is volunteer-based. So as a nonprofit, we know all of the money that's donated and grant funding goes right into planting the trees, to growing the trees and supporting these communities. So this effort really is not possible without the support of these communities. They're the ones who are choosing to reforest their land, to plant the trees. And at sites, we might have upwards of sometimes 400 to 500 volunteers from that community planting these trees. So it's really an empowerment-based model as well. And as José Luis shared, the nursery staff is primarily women, which is another wonderful part of this project, offering economic empowerment to single women and single moms who might not otherwise have an economic resource. And then I know we're probably a little over time, so I'll just quickly share some contact information and then some great resources in the Monarch community. So thank you so much to everyone and for José Luis as well.
All right. Thank you very much for your presentation, José Luis, and Megan as well for contributing to it. I will say that's very impressive, the amount of trees you have planted and the amount of community that you have engaged with. And it's amazing to see that type of work getting done. So thank you for your presentation. Our last and final panelist for today is going to be Shanna Edberg. So Shanna is a longtime conservation advocate and promoter of environmental justice in the US and abroad. She directs Hispanic Access Foundation's conservation programs to promote environmental stewardship in the Latino community, elevate Latino voices in conservation policy, activate Latino conservation leaders, and provide them the resources they need to create a more sustainable and just future. So without further ado, welcome Shanna.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to share a little bit about our work and how we elevate Latino community voices and stories to end policy initiatives to really get the work of protecting our nature and our wildlife done. So Hispanic Access Foundation is a national nonprofit with the mission to connect Latinos with partners and opportunities to improve lives and create an equitable society. This is our amazing conservation team. It's just me here today, but just so you know that we have like this really incredible group of folks behind the work that we do. And we work in a variety of different areas related to conservation. Our four main buckets of work are public lands protection, ocean and coastal protection, clean waterways and watersheds, and in climate change, all of which I think really relate to the Monarchs. And what we do in those areas are, it's really great to hear the work of the scientists and the reforesters and the folks doing this habitat restoration on the ground. What we end up doing is kind of more on the policy and storytelling and community engagement side. So we create research, resources, polling data that really shows why Latinos care so much about these issues, how environmental issues affect Latinos, and kind of where they are in terms of like climate policy, conservation policy. And this is just to educate our advocates, but also to educate policymakers and the media, and just really to go on this theme of like elevating the voices that aren't typically heard in conservation and climate change conversations. We work to build leaders. So these are some of what we call our leadership networks. Olas y Acción is an ocean conservationist group of young professionals that all work on ocean and coastal conservation. We have a faith-based network called Por la Creación that works to protect God's creation through our network of Latino churches throughout the US, and our climate council, kind of similar to Olas y Acción, that is young professionals all working in the field of climate change and just bringing together peer support for each other, as well as directly training them, providing workshops like bringing them on the ground to engage in stewardship opportunities, involving them in our policy campaigns as well, which I'll get to in a bit. And we are always welcoming new folks into our networks. So I know it's in the resource list, but also you can go to our website and find out how to join. One thing that we really love to do is tell stories. So we have created a series of films just relating Latino communities and explaining like why these cultural connections are so powerful, and not just in film, but also in writing, as well as telling stories to the media. Again, just like bringing this kind of underrepresented group to the forefront of in order to make change in conservation. And we engage communities directly through initiatives like Latino Conservation Week, which takes place every July. This year was actually our 10th anniversary, and we held more than 300 events around the country of just local community organizers bringing their families and their friends and their churches and their communities and their schools out to engage in stewardship, or simply to recreate outdoors. The Latino community is one that faces disproportionate lack of access to nature and to recreation opportunities, and often is not aware of the opportunities and the nature that exists nearby them, or because of a lack of comfort, they don't often get outside to enjoy their spaces. So Latino Conservation Week is a way that we really celebrate and take up space in the outdoors and show that Latinos really belong in conservation and stewardship and outdoor recreation. We are also hosting a film festival this week, in fact, tonight, starting at 4 o'clock. It's called Our Heritage, Our Planet Film Week. And again, just on this theme of sharing stories of the community, not just Latino communities in this case, but for all communities of color, communities of the global majority, just telling their stories of how they connect to our planet and what they are doing to face its challenges. So I really hope you can join us, if not tonight, then Thursday or Friday this week. We've got some really incredible films on the schedule, as well as dialogues, conversations, report releases. We've got Indigenous leaders sharing their stories live, just like a really ton of great content happening this week. And we take action directly. We bring our networks of leaders and advocates to Capitol Hill. We bring them to talk to the Biden administration, to their local mayors, to their representatives, to their senators. And we engage year-round in supporting various campaigns to protect different areas of lands and waters, and with climate legislation as well. So to share one example of that, here in the Chesapeake, the senator of Maryland and representatives in Virginia as well have introduced a bill to designate the Chesapeake National Recreation Area, basically to make the Chesapeake Bay a new part of the National Park Service, which would be really cool, we think, and would also help that issue of Latino access to nature and other communities of color access to nature, because the Bay is such a beautiful resource here for all of us, but it's kind of has barriers of access issues. And we think that adding national park status to parts of the Bay would be a really great way to facilitate our communities, get more resources, and just enable our communities to actually go out and enjoy this beautiful landscape that we have here. And I also, time permitting, I wanted to share this short video just to kind of give an example of the way we do this storytelling and how we work with communities like our faith communities. And so this is from a video series we created called Cartas de Amor, where we had our leaders actually write love letters to their local rivers. I must have done the wrong sharing settings. My apologies. Let's see if I can try that again. Well, it's not letting me click on the share sound option, so I apologize for that. I'm just gonna go ahead and keep going with the presentation then. And I was really excited when I heard about the theme of this webinar because, in fact, we are going to be directing our energy to creating a new film all about sharing the cultural connections of Latinos to the monarch butterfly, because a lot of our leaders are from the areas where the monarchs winter in Mexico. And we just wanted to tell this story of migration of people and wildlife, you know, across national borders from Mexico to the US to Canada. You know, people are moving, the monarchs are moving, and we all depend on natural resources like the nature and the clean water and a stable climate in order to thrive. Yes, I will definitely be posting these links. I really apologize for the lack of sound. So you can all watch them on your own time. So that this film will be premiered next year, we believe at next year's Latino Conservation Week. And so I hope you all maybe consider hosting your own events and telling your own stories at these national inflection points that we promote and support. So that is it for me. Please give us a follow at Hispanic Access, or check out our website where all these resources and films and toolkits are posted. And I'd be happy to hear from you as well. And here's some ways to support monetarily if that is of interest.
All right. Thank you very much, Shanna, for your presentation. I will say it's amazing to see like the type of work that Hispanic Access Foundation is doing to engage the Latino community and really involve them. So I just wanted to say thank you for your presentation. We do have some time for Q&A. Some of the panelists have been answering questions throughout the presentation, so thank you for that. Let's see. If you have any questions that you'd like to be answered, feel free to put them in the chat. I'm sorry, the Q&A, not chat. That was my mistake. While we wait for people to come up with some questions, I did have a question for Jose Luis. I was just very interested in seeing how that initial interaction was when engaging with the community and the farmers, and what was the process like being able to, I guess, let them know about the benefits of planting those trees.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, basically, the first time I went up there in 1997, I spoke to one of the community leaders, a young forester, and I said, listen, I've got 30,000 trees. I need 3 sites that are farmland that were once forests, and could you introduce me to 3 different landowners? He says, yes, definitely. So I went out there, met these people, told them what I wanted to do, how I wanted to change their eroded land back into forest. They said yes. It was done. And from there on, it was just very easy because everyone else, when they saw how the trees took off, they say that soil has a memory. And I suppose soil does have a memory, because on these terribly eroded pieces of land, okay, the trees just took off beautifully, and they grew beautifully. And so, again, that opened the door to the other neighbors who had the same type of situation, same type of land that had been forest at one time and that had been converted into farmland.
Of course, that makes a lot of sense, being able to see the effects in person and then the effects on their land. Of course, they would have a connection with that. So thank you for sharing that.
Just remember one thing, people are very proud of what they do. If it's not like there were some programs, I won't say who had these programs, but that would pay people not to cut trees. And I found that to be totally stupid, you know, because you're paying people not to cut a tree, to where you can have people plant trees and love what they're doing, be proud of it, and see how it's transforming their land. And this is what people need to be proud, okay, to have a sense of doing something positive.
Yes, that completely makes sense, in sense of having a personal connection to what you're doing instead of just offering that incentive and there's no basis for it besides, oh, we just don't want the tree cut. So,
Exactly.
thank you for that. And then at the moment, there are no other questions in the Q&A.
Hi, everyone. I will point out just really quickly that some of our presenters did go through and answer some of the questions. I know Shanna included the link to the YouTube channel. So if you go through the answered Q&A, you can also see some of those links, and we will send those links out in a follow-up email to all of the registered attendees as well.
Yes, thank you, Marissa, for letting everyone know about that. I also had another question for Shanna, just because I was really interested in the process of, I guess, capturing the stories of people and how, because you mentioned, of course, the parallel between the migration of people and the migration of the monarch butterfly. And I was wondering, did the stories you captured, did they make that connection themselves, or was it more of a they discovered it along the way kind of thing?
It actually came out of our team brainstorming what kind of stories we wanted to tell, because one of the stories that will be featured in the film, you saw the street art of the big beautiful mural of the butterfly. So that is a family of folks who migrated from central Mexico and now live in Chicago. And as part of their church, they do like butterfly gardens and butterfly activities. And they had a whole Latino Conservation Week event related to the monarch. So we thought, like, that's just such an amazing example of this migration of people and wildlife. So yeah, it starts with the stories that we know of from our community members.
Wow, that's really like amazing that it kind of just happened naturally. They just brought it over, and then that's the image that you present. So, what's the word I'm looking? A serendipity, right? A very nice coincidence. We do have another question in the Q&A. People would like to know from Emily Wallace, what does the difference between endangered and threatened status mean? And I believe this would be more for Julie Slacum.
Oh gosh, gotta get my handbook out. No, endangered, essentially it's, you know, like your species is gonna go extinct very quickly. For threatened, it's the species is in decline, but it's not gonna happen tomorrow, essentially. So it's just that time period that we look at between endangered and threatened.
Thank you for that. I guess a follow-up question from me personally would be, is there a way that kind of threshold is, because I feel like there would be a kind of gray area where how can you tell which side it falls on? Have you
Well,
come
I
across
can-
that?
I can give you an example. So our bats that essentially, and I'm sorry, I'm shifting to bats now, but so essentially their populations have declined due to white nose syndrome, which is a disease that, you know, has essentially it's a fungus that's in caves. So all of our cave dwelling bats, you know, their populations have decreased by like 90+%. So that's a trajectory where you're like, okay, we don't have much time, you know, to deal with this. So that's kind of a good example, you know, that really quick, steep decline. And we hope, you know, if we're gonna list anything, it's more at that threatened stage where we know it's in decline, you know, it faces a lot of threats, but you know, we have time to try to recover the species.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for that. I think that makes a lot more sense conceptualizing it with that example. So thank you. At the moment, there's no other questions in the Q&A. So for now, I guess I have Marissa take over.
Yeah, thank you everyone so much for participating today. Thank you to Julie for providing an overview of our efforts here in the Chesapeake, to Megan and Jose for talking about everything happening in Mexico, and to Shanna for talking about the Hispanic Access Foundation's work to bring in the Latino community into conservation work. Thank you so much to William for moderating and for managing this Q&A and welcoming all of our presenters. And thank you to all of our guests for attending today. As I mentioned earlier, we will send out the resources to everyone, so you'll have access to that, and the presentation will be uploaded to our YouTube channel by the end of the week. So thank you again, everyone. We appreciate your participation and attendance today, and we hope to see you soon.